Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Nigel. I was laughing as you said Boston. I was like, I'm glad I don't have the Boston accent, or that transcriber tool would be pretty hopeless. Just see if this. Well, thank you all so much for coming out. Really, just been a phenomenal week here. I've spent kind of the week here and just really immersed myself in pub culture and all the really important research-driven things here. And so a lot of different things to talk about. I'm going to go pretty quick. We're going to get through a lot in the next 20, 25 minutes. One thing I really want to emphasize before we jump in, though, is what Nigel and Patricia both touched upon about this whole idea of even if you don't know where you're going, you kind of just need to dive in. I actually went back through my emails and was looking. I remember, 3-4 years ago, when the OpenAI project started, we actually, through some mutual friends, known Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, the founders of OpenAI. And I sent them an email and I said, hey, I know you all are working on this, GPT-3 stuff. Is there any way we can get some early access to it? We want to have our engineers train it. We don't really know what we're going to use it for yet, but we think that there will be something valuable. And they got right back and they said, sure, we need beta testers. Here's what it is. Here's how it works. Can you try this out? And this was, 3.5 years ago. And so what's really fascinating is this all kind of blew up in the past year or so, but we've actually been able to do a lot with it over the past few years, just from kind of that head start there. Today I'll be talking about a lot of different things, really just how I think, again, to that whole idea of application, we all kind of get wowed by these new tools and ideas, and there's all of this exciting stuff, but really what it comes down to is the distribution of it, right? Taking that next step. How are we going to use this? How are we going to apply it to what we're actually doing every day? And what are the really powerful ways that we all as learning practitioners can actually bring this into our organization? And so what we've seen with a lot of our customer base and folks we work with is that really what it does is create a massive competitive edge. First, I'd like to kind of just ask you all a question to think about, which is which company, and I'll try not to walk in front of the text here, which company boasts learning as its competitive edge, right? Meant to be rhetorical, you don't have to answer, but really think about that. You hop on an earnings call or hear about a company IPOing and they say, the reason that we had an amazing quarter or we're able to do this is because of our learning department. If you think about companies' kind of core competencies here, for Amazon, it's logistics and customer experience. For Nike, it's branding, and Apple, it's design as well as marketing. But for learning, we don't really have that, right? We don't really have a company that says the reason that we win, the reason that we best all of our competitors is because of how agile our workforce is, how quickly people can learn, and how quickly we can upskill, reskill, and just completely transform tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people all at once. And so that's something that we're obsessed with, is creating this whole idea of a learning-first organization where that is their core competitive edge. In a world that changes weekly, we've talked about, since they, asked me to do the talk, I've completely replaced a lot of the things in these slides. Even in the past week, I had to go update some of these things because the world is just changing that fast. Speed to learning in a world that changes that fast will be the defining competitive edge for most businesses. Most of the tools that we're using on the job today didn't exist a year ago. And so any type of formal education is not going to be very valuable. And so a lot of what we're focused on is how do we really increase speed to learning? And I'm going to show you all some of that today. By and large, just a bit of context before I jump in there. L&D today, and a lot of what we're seeing is that we have a lot of problems that AI has a huge ability to solve. One is that, and we went and surveyed a bunch of CEOs, we're often unable to solve immediate challenges. We need a really long heads up, and I say this as someone who's spent years building learning. And the second is that we're forced to often be quite reactive to problems. I've had many CLOs come to me and say, I feel like a deli counter. I take a ticket, someone needs something, I give it back to them, right? We believe that AI can actually shift that paradigm and really make L&D a strategic partner. Only about 4% of CEOs feel like learning and training has meaningful ROI, and over 90% feel like L&D doesn't respond to needs fast enough. And so these are just some of the areas where we see immediate opportunity for applicability with a lot of what's coming out. So according to CEOs, just to be really straightforward with it, L&D teams need to, 1, show clear impact, 2, keep up with the pace of the business. And so if L&D can't move as fast or faster than the business, if we can't learn faster than the business is changing, we are going to become obsolete and extinct. And 3 is to be predictive, to be strategic. And so by the point we've shown clear impact, by the point we've kept up with the business and been speedy enough, how do we then take it even a step further and say we know what's coming next? And so currently what we see is that, we see little impact, less than 10% completion rates. We're all familiar with lots of content libraries and LMSs and LXPs that people often aren't taking or they don't make time for. Long turnaround, on average, it takes about 4 to 9 months to, go from, hey, here's this first need that we have, here's something we have to train everyone on, to we've been able to prove some type of impact, even if we can, in that regard. And the third is no predictiveness. And so again, we're often, we feel like a deli counter. We're quite reactive to business needs. And really what we found, becoming obsessed with this whole idea of just how do we shift this paradigm, right? All of the biggest business challenges we're seeing today are fundamentally learning challenges. They're people challenges, right? And so everyone in this room, if we all counted our employees as students, we'd make up the largest university in the world. And so there's a lot of ability and opportunity to shift a lot of this. So I've spent the last 5 years, Nigel mentioned we met right when we were starting this, focused on creating learning that people actually take and apply. And it all started by accident. Something that Patricia had said in her wonderful speech earlier, and Nigel mentioned earlier too, is that engagement is one of the most important things. First, you need people's attention, and then we can play with the data. And so everyone's become obsessed with how can AI generate coursework and how can it do all these different things. But learning, we still have this fundamental challenge, which is that people often are not taking what we're putting in front of them. And so we believe that by solving that first, and that's what we've really been obsessed with, it gives us a lot more data, a lot more opportunity to make some of these seismic generational shifts. So 5 years ago, what really started this, I had taken a trip. I was running another company at the time, and I'd taken a trip to a rural village in Tanzania. And I spent a few weeks there teaching an entrepreneurship class, teaching students about things like business and accounting. A lot of learnings from the few weeks I spent there. But one of the most prolific was just how inaccessible education was to most people. I remember thinking at the time, well, we've got MOOCs, we've got online courses. This was pre-COVID when everyone kind of told us that e-learning was just a passing fad. And what we found that was really interesting is that most people didn't have access to this. I would have thought, okay, half the world, 3/4 of the world, only about 24% of the world has the internet broadband capable of accessing a full video, like an hour-long course. And so we became kind of obsessed with this idea of how do we deliver learning? A friend of mine who I had met in college was trying to deliver learning to students in the Yemeni war zone as well. We couldn't send textbooks, we couldn't mail things. Their education system was completely defunct. And so we became obsessed with this idea of how do we bring learning to the people who need it most, even if they have very limited or almost no access to the internet. And at the same time, we found the statistic where 24% of the world could actually access an online video, like something you might see on YouTube. Over 85% could receive an SMS message or a WhatsApp message. And so that led us to ask, at the time it was kind of a provocative question, what happens if we text people as a way of teaching them? And so we got together a bunch of random things we found online. We worked with a few professors of ours, and I was in university at the time, and decided to build the world's first, what we call a text message course. So you get a series of messages each day that are trying to train you how to do something. And we originally just thought, okay, it's going to be interesting because students who never had access to education will, start to get some basic material and help to lead them into other types of material. We found that was even more fascinating, and what kind of just surprised us, it was just a research project at the time, was that the satisfaction rates and engagement rates across learning mediums completely were an order of magnitude difference. The thing that was most astounding to me personally was that a lot of folks who had plenty of access to the internet were using it as frequently, if not more frequently, than folks who didn't. They were just kind of finding it, were using it, were engaging with it. And so again, we started to look at a lot of this and start to say, okay, we have this really interesting opportunity. We've got people's attention. The people check text message, Microsoft Teams, a medium like that every 6 minutes. They check an LMS once every 6 to 8 weeks on average. And so, there was just kind of this seismic shift that we didn't really think of just by putting things where people actually were. What was more fascinating is this kind of led us to say, okay, we have people's attention, but that's great that they pay attention to something. I thought, okay, it's short, it's bite-sized, we can just send tips. Might seem a little gimmicky to people at first, especially pre-COVID. This was just seen as kind of ridiculous, quite honestly. And so we started to ask ourselves, all right, well now, what would a better model of learning look like? And if we were to redesign from the ground up, because we've got people's attention, which is the hardest part, how do we build that? And so we said, first, it's smaller, it's bite-sized, about 5 to 7 minutes per day, kind of hits a sweet spot. Second, it's very spaced out, and so things will spaced out over 1 to 2 weeks with prompts and things to application a few weeks or even months later. So because we've spaced that out, you can bring retention up very strongly. So people are paying attention, they're retaining it. Third is to be pragmatic about practice, and so lots of action prompts, nudges to do things right. We like to say that a good course, when well structured, spends about as much time, if not more, on practicing something as learning new information. And so that's great. I taught you as a manager how to give and receive difficult feedback. Now I'm going to prompt you over the course of the next few days and weeks to ask how you're doing it, give you more advice and tips, and try to get you to follow some sort of an action plan. But then finally, again, that big seismic shift delivered where people are, this is the one that creates, if you take anything from this, this is the one that creates completely outsized outcomes. Again, about 0.2% of all time at work, on average 5 minutes per week for any given individual in a company when averaged out over a quarter is spent in one of these systems. But about 80% of all time that we don't spend on the phone or synchronously face-to-face at work is on SMS, WhatsApp, Slack, Microsoft Teams, one of these mediums. And so again, when you put something where people's attention is, you create these absolutely seismic shifts in how often they pay attention to something and the kind of outcomes that you can create. So again, this is what that might look like. You'll get some kind of an image or a GIF, a few screen lengths of standard content, questions or exercises, instant feedback or follow-up prompts, and then some sort of follow-up content after. It might take me 5 to 7 minutes per day. There's no app downloads. It could arrive in a Microsoft Teams and an email message, something similar to that. And so again, I want to go back to that whole idea of our most common learners. So we thought, okay, we've got people's attention. This is going to be widely applicable to folks who don't have access to the internet. What we found is that thousands and thousands of people from all over the world were finding it who were construction workers, who were software engineers, who were truck drivers, who were Starbucks baristas, right? Folks who were either large frontline workforces who didn't have access to a laptop all day, or even folks, like some of our colleagues who did and who worked a desk job in the traditional sense. We call them deskless and desk-based. Desk-based workers who said, okay, this is really interesting. People are actually reacting to this. They're actually using this. What other content do you have? What else can you do? What other mediums? So again, that was when we knew that this kind of model was going to create a seismic shift in learning. But again, this was the problem that we ran into at first. People were actually taking and applying learning. And you've heard me say that a few times because I think that this, again, is the most powerful shift. And I want to point this out to just encourage you all to try things that might seem kind of new, kind of crazy, and just, again, kind of laughable at first, into something that is just really, really powerful. And so now we've got people's attention. Hopefully I have your attention. We've got people's attention. We've got all the data. There's a lot we can do with it. And then we go back to this whole idea of, okay, according to CEOs, L&D teams need to show clear impact, keep up with the pace of the business, and be predictive to be strategic. Well, that's great. We've done one of those things, right? We've shown some sort of clear impact. We've gotten people to pay attention. We started to do number one. And so we became obsessed again with this idea a few years ago of, okay, now we've got people's attention. What comes next? This was something in particular that stood out to us. This is the time that it takes to roll out vaccine training for a company like Pfizer. And so again, think about one of the world's arguably most innovative companies, and it takes 2 months to assess needs, 6 months to plan out a creation timeline. Think back to that whole idea, that second point of keeping up with the pace of the business. It takes 3 months to localize delivery, translation, right, make everything region specific. It takes about a month to go and measure once an experience has happened, how that actually went. And so in total, it takes about a year to go from we need this to happen to we actually have some type of impact on a global scale. And to us, this was something that we found, and we said, okay, well, this is really interesting because we've talked about how learning can have massive impacts. You heard me say before, learning is the biggest edge to change any business in the world, and a lot of us just haven't realized it yet. And so what's fascinating is think about the impact if instead of 12 months, Pfizer could do this in 6 weeks, right? Think about how many lives we would save. Think about how many people we would impact. Think about if I can launch something to a 150,000 person, 200, 300,000 person organization 5 to 10 to 20 times faster than my largest competitor. That creates a seismic shift, but people aren't thinking about their learning teams that way yet. And so that's our job, is to get learning teams there. And so here's where AI can help. And no, it will not take our jobs. I need that scary robot slide that Nigel showed earlier. So again, we've got all this data, we've got people's attention. We start to say, okay, how can we kind of solve 2 and 3? How can we start to not just enable businesses to keep up with the pace and outpace the business, but actually allow businesses to be really strategic? So I'll go through kind of a few quick hit ones. First was, we said, well, the obvious one is build content. We can shrink that creation time, right? What we found is, one, let AI build that first draft. We call it a sidekick. And so essentially use that single prompt course creation. This is similar to something like a ChatGPT. And so I'll show you in a sec, but the way that that system would work is you'll input a single prompt. What's happening in the background is we're prompting GPT-4 about 150 times to get a certain type of output in rapid succession. The second is, and this is brand new, upload a SCORM, PowerPoint, PDF, and have it instantly convert something into that. And so often what we hear from folks is, but I've got 20 years of legacy content. I have a lot of this great stuff, right? I don't want to lose that. The exciting thing is that AI has gotten really, really good at taking a bunch of disparate materials, organizing them into a set outline, and actually outputting them in a way that makes sense, that tests your application, that uses a lot of best learning practices in learning science and pedagogy. And the third, and this is really exciting, this is brand new as well, is training a closed loop AI instance that will actually output relevant coursework. And so when ChatGPT first came out, a lot of our customers, folks in the government, pharmaceuticals, they have a lot of sensitive information, and they said, hey, we can't use this because I'm not going to put government military secrets into ChatGPT. That seems like a bad idea, which it does seem like a bad idea. But what Microsoft has recently released, which allows this, is actually closed loop Azure instances that basically say, to put it in layman's terms, I can feed this a bunch of information. It will use what it knows from the outside world. It will train itself internally in the separate instance on what I've taught it, but it's not going to share what I've taught it with the outside world. And so what that does is it opens up this whole band of governments, Fortune 500 organizations, all these organizations that have a lot of sensitive info to actually use this for the first time. And so this is what, the result is about 10 to 30x course creation speed. And so we had partnered with Microsoft and OpenAI to do that. This is what it might look like to upload a SCORM file, right, and have it instantly convert something. And again, in a closed loop instance of Azure powered by OpenAI, we can go in there and say, okay, I've uploaded all this documentation. I've sent all these things to you. I sent you my employee handbook, my sales training. Now explain to me how this might happen at my company or how we might roll out this training, right? And you as a learning designer can get back that input, can edit that, and then can decide who to push that out to. The second piece of that, after AI has built that content, is let AI create and serve that relevant course content to learners. So the first way to do that, again, I'll show you this in a sec, is integrate with existing systems to push learning in the moment of need. What we're basically doing is we're putting learning on autopilot. And so the first big tranche that took there was creation. We have to build all this stuff. The next thing is we now have to push all this stuff out. We found that learning practitioners spend about 40 to 45% of their time on creation and about 30 to 40% of their time on course marketing, just trying to convince people to take things and convince them to use things, right? And so what we're doing is we're rapidly decreasing the amount of time that we're spending on both of those things so that we can spend a lot more time on strategy and oversight and data analysis, which today is only about 5 to 10% of the time of the L&D role. And so we can push content to learners in places they check every 6 minutes. Like I mentioned, that's a really important foundation to make this all work. And then the most exciting thing is that we can then send content to learners based on what they're struggling with. And so what this might look like to set everything up is I might say, hey, I know that I'm going to integrate with Workday, and I know that my ICs are promoted to manager, excuse me, or I know that performance review time is coming up, or quarterly OKR season is coming up. And so I'm going to set specific triggers to put this learning on autopilot. Not only have we built it with AI, but we can now integrate and set this all up so that these moments of need learning are constantly happening. What this looks like at a large, one of the largest automotive organizations in the United States is it completely changes the paradigm for how someone learns at work. If I'm a new manager, I'm going to go through new manager pre-boarding in my first week. I'm going to get new manager onboarding continuously for the first few months, manager know-hows quarterly, giving and receiving effective feedback, how to hold OKRs, how to have a career conversation, how to be an inclusive leader. And then foundational topics are ongoing. And so what we're doing is actually shifting the culture of learning when we think about how AI can constantly bring relevant content to learners, because what we're saying is learning is no longer something that you go to, but it's also not something that is an event, right? It really makes learning a habit because it's this constant, always on pulse of getting information. And when you shrink we call it the atomic unit of learning, when you shrink that down to a message or something small and bite-sized, what you can do is actually make learning something that every single employee does every single day. We find the average employee takes about 5 or 6 courses per month, and that's something that it just wouldn't really be something we'd think of even 2-3 years ago. The final piece, and my favorite and the most exciting, is that with that, we've got people's attention, we're serving lots of content, so we collect a lot of data. We're collecting about 100 times the amount of data on any given learner that an LMS or an LXP might. So there's a lot we can do with that. One is, with that data, as I mentioned, but two, AI can dynamically predict an individual's likelihood of things like turnover or things like promotion. And so we can use that, I talked about earlier being predictive, we can use that to become a true competitive edge for the business. And so let's say I launch a new course on manager, upskilling, how to hold career conversations, how to set OKRs, and I launch this to 150,000 people globally, to ICs and to managers. And I can come back and say, hey, it looks like in North America, you're going to have a real turnover problem. People seem far less engaged. It looks like, did you know that your sales team in the Southwest is really bad at handling objections in this new product? Did you know that in parts of Europe, it seems like you have a huge risk of employee disengagement because of different things that are happening, right? And so, again, because we've got so much data powered by all of these things that we're doing with AI in order to make learning constantly relevant, to constantly get feedback from folks, we're often getting several touch points on every single learner every single day. And so what that does is it allows us to sit AI on top of that and to say, now let's actually be a thought partner. We can kind of see the future for the business and be really, really strategic. And so, these are things that your CEO can expect from learning. Hey, after the product launch, 28% of sales reps, like I mentioned, North America is still struggling with handling objections. Our customer reps are seeing higher rates of people not feeling confident in banking with us. Maybe I work for Silicon Valley Bank. We just went through the banking crisis, or the bank run and the bank crash, and we need to now rapidly instill customer confidence. And the third piece, this region has a huge turnover risk based on how people are feeling about their floor managers. We are a large construction company. We employ over 70,000 people. And what we find is that in these specific regions, we clearly didn't train floor managers well because we're seeing higher rates of turnover. We can actually stop a lot of these problems before they happen. Because that's the problem right now with things like turnover, is we can only see them when they're happening and then go fix a lot of the root cause issues when it's a little bit too late. And so again, and the L&D team can finally say, we've seen these issues, and because of all the other stuff, don't worry, we're on it and we can fix it. So again, this might look like for a company like Pfizer, AI analyzing most pressing needs, and that's kind of going on continuously, but to pull all that together, take about a week. Creation in 3 weeks, and so that creation, that translation, again, we're seeing about a 10 to 30x difference in the time it takes to actually create things, to translate things, especially the more kind of multimedia and in-depth they are, which would take a human longer. It takes about 2 weeks to instantly push that to those right audiences. Again, the reason I spend so much time on that is because think about people being cued into a system where they're always paying attention. Then when we push stuff out, we don't have to spend all this time marketing and trying to convince folks to do things. And then finally, all of that measurement, that scenario analysis that I mentioned can happen in real time. And so we can say, okay, it seems like these are all the challenges that we're having, but we don't have to go through a measurement period. We don't have to do a quarterly pulse survey, right? That's constantly happening. And then finally, again, we see that proven impact. And so again, really just kind of bringing us back here, if the premise I opened on was this whole idea of just the largest challenges that businesses face today are fundamentally challenges that can be solved by learning. And so we all have a really important, really, really vital job to do in changing how business works. If Pfizer can launch pharmaceuticals 10 times faster, that creates a massive competitive edge for them and for the world more broadly. Higher speed and attention to learning give us a massive head start thanks to tools like SMS and thanks to AI. Finally, just to wrap up, a lot of folks will often ask me about kind of the origins in Tanzania. Do we still do a lot of nonprofit work? We actually will, give a lot of these tools for free to some of the world's largest nonprofit organizations. In 2022, we were able to deliver courses to over 1 million students in need, and in 2023, on track to do that with about 4 million students. And so again, this is the power of using a lot of these tools of faster creation, of using AI just to scale things in a way that we never thought possible. Because better learning doesn't just mean better companies, better impact, it also means a better world, and we can all build it together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
If we could just put the QR code up for 1 second, that's our friend Josh Burson made a course on bias in AI. It's a really important topic, and so if you scan that, you can get a WhatsApp course to your phone that will teach you about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.